Belinda Kinkead is our next speaker, a career engineer who's worked around the world with the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, and Belinda is currently Country Director in Australia for Brooklyn-based energy company LO3 Energy that specialises in microgrids and blockchain technology and other groovy things. Belinda will talk to the theme Climate Change and Energy Policy. Please welcome Belinda. Here we go. How's that?
Scary.
Is that alright?
It's a bit scary.
Okay.
So, luckily the federal government gave me a bit to work with this week. As I tend to do it just-in-time time management, so I finished my speech on the plane. And anyone who watches Insiders, so last Sunday if you watched Insiders, you would have seen Federal Energy Minister Angus Taylor assuring us all that Australia's greenhouse gas emissions were coming down. He repeatedly said coming down, and that we're on track to meet our Paris climate targets at a canter, as Anne also included in her speech. And in reality, that's just blatant lies. Both of those things are just lies. First, if we look at the claim that Australia's greenhouse gas emissions are coming down, data released from the government itself shows that Australia's greenhouse gas emissions have been rising for the last 4 years, basically ever since Tony Abbott came in and got rid of Julia Gillard's carbon pollution reduction scheme, or the carbon price. And it's important here to remember that greenhouse gas emissions, they cross multiple sectors of the economy. So that's not just electricity, it's all sorts of other things. So direct combustion, transportation, fugitive emissions, they've all increased since 2005, and according to the government's own forecasts, are projected to continue to increase to 2030. The only sector where emissions are falling significantly is the electricity sector, and that's largely due to the rapid growth in deployment of renewables, so both large-scale wind and solar, but also the fact that so many people are putting rooftop solar on their homes. So I think in 2018 we had more than 1 gigawatt of rooftop solar go onto Australian rooftops. So while it's truthful for Angus Taylor to say that greenhouse gas emissions from the electricity sector are coming down, it is downright misleading to suggest that this equates to overall emissions coming down. And of course, the delicious irony, if you want to put it that way, is that the Coalition have spent much of the last 5 years totally trash-talking renewables and talking up coal at every opportunity that they get. So for example, who can forget our illustrious Prime Minister Scott Morrison bringing his pet rock, otherwise known as a lump of coal, into Parliament and telling the opposition benches, don't be afraid of the coal. And just this week we had Resources Minister Matt Canavan saying that a very early stage plan to look at building new coal-fired generation in the Hunter Valley sounded like a good idea, and he was all for taxpayer funds to help the project along. And then there were 6 of his coalition buddies from his home state in Queensland, and that included George Christensen, Ken Down and Michelle Landry, telling the LNP leadership that they wanted the government to commit to funding a new coal-fired power station in Queensland before the next election or else. So, which is just, you know, insane, because the economics tell a completely different story. There is no case for a new coal-fired generator on economic, engineering, environmental grounds. New coal generators are not, as their marketing term implies, low emissions and high efficiency. They are completely the opposite. They are expensive to maintain, as AGL has highlighted, with their ageing facilities that they're refusing to not shut down, and expensive to build from scratch. So even the CSIRO and the Australian Energy Market Operator came to the conclusion saying that the cheapest option for Australia for new generation is wind and solar and battery and pumped hydro storage. No contest, much cheaper than new coal. And there's no place for new coal plants in the grid. The national electricity market is already transitioning rapidly away from the decades-old paradigm of coal-based load and gas peak load and is becoming much more dynamic. It's all about flexibility and dispatchability. So having demand that can follow very spiky generation curves. So in spite of tremendous coalition efforts to the contrary, the electricity sector is the one success story that they can point to in terms of action on climate change and reducing emissions. So for Angus Taylor to be talking up the coalition's achievements on that front, well, I mean, the hypocrisy is just breathtaking. And I think as I watched it last Sunday, there was a little bit of swearing involved, and my 8-year-old came in to ask me, what's going on? But I filled him in without swear words. So transport emissions have been going up continuously, and they continue to go up, and there's really no government policy to deal with that. Stationary energy and industrial processes still going up. Fugitive emissions still going up. So at best, the claim that Australia's emissions are going down is obfuscation. And at worst, it's deliberately and completely misleading, purely for political purposes. And you may have heard this week as well that even Tony Abbott has changed his mind about Australia staying part of the Paris Climate Agreement. And of course, I'm sure that has nothing to do with being challenged for his seat in Warringah by an independent running on policies of strong climate change, but he has definitely seen the light. So which brings us to the next claim, that Australia will beat its Paris emission targets at a canter. So in reality, the way that the government plans to do that is if we use carried over credits from the Kyoto Protocol. So when the Kyoto Protocol was established, Australia was one of only 3 countries internationally who were allowed to increase emissions on a base year of 1990. We ended up exceeding our Kyoto commitments, and we're literally carrying this hot air, these credits. So the government is planning on carrying over these credits from the Kyoto crediting periods and counting them against our Paris targets. So there are still questions over whether this is allowed under the agreement, but the use of these carried over credits could mean that technically, yes, we meet our targets, but with zero net benefit in terms of greenhouse gas reduction. So again, at best, it's gaming of the system. At worst, it's just cheating. And is that really the way that a country like Australia, one of the most developed economies in the world, with one of the highest rates of greenhouse gas emissions per capita, and one of the countries most blessed with abundant sources of renewable energy, is that how we really want to meet our international obligations to take action on climate change? Definitely not. So we may be small in terms of absolute emissions, but we have a moral obligation to the international community, to generations to come, to act. So these claims from the government, do more harm than just doing nothing. So at least if they admitted they were doing nothing, other people could step in and fill the void. But by sort of muddying the waters, it allows people to sit on their hands, and we don't have time to waste. So transitioning entire industries and sectors, developing new skills, changing behaviour, it all takes time. So now, we've been sitting on our hands for too long. Now is the time for leadership and action, not spin. So the facts are Australia's emissions projections from 2018, published by the federal government, show 1, that Australia is not currently on track to meet its 2030 emissions reductions target. 2, that greenhouse gas pollution in 2030 is projected to be higher than today. And there's a very simple thing that we could do. So the thing that could really make a big difference is we need a price on carbon, which was what Julia Gillard tried to put in place and did put in place. It was very effective actually in reducing emissions until it was axed, when Tony axed the tax. And it was going to evolve into something more than a tax, but like a $2 billion emission reduction fund, which has been rebadged by Scott Morrison as his Climate Action Fund, it does nothing you know, maybe that $2 billion is better spent actually buying back coal or ageing coal resource assets and retiring them permanently, or ahead of when they would have been. A price on carbon is the most economically efficient and effective way of reducing emissions. It gives a clear signal to industry across all sectors of the Australian economy. It incentivises innovation, it allows people to build new business models, and it allows that transition. So, because if we're not able to tackle this challenge, then transition stops being an option. I really like sci-fi novels and dystopic novels, but I really don't want to live in one. So it's really time that we get off our asses and do something now while we still can. And so that's why I'm here, and that's why I want to get Mark elected to the Senate. So thank you.